Well, welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Professional Development Webinar Series brought to you by Ave Maria Press. We are here, and our goal here is to provide parish ministers, diocesan ministers, staff, and volunteers the formation training and the tools that they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, we're joined by 4 experienced panelists who will share some specific approaches and creative answers to young adult faith formation. My name is Jared Dees. I am the Content Marketing Manager here at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. This webinar is brought to you once again in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests Councils. And in a special way, this webinar is being brought to you in partnership with the NCCL's Adult Faith Formation Committee, which we'll talk about here in more detail in just a moment. So we are going to have a discussion, which means we'll be able to field questions during the webinar, and you can ask questions to any of the panelists or all of the panelists using the GoToWebinar panel, questions panel you can see displayed on your screen here. We'll ask as many of those or offer as many of those as we can towards the end of the presentation, but don't feel like you have to wait until the end. I'd also like to note the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording later on this week, so watch your email inboxes. So with that, I'd like to extend a welcome to our 4 panelists. This is how the webinar is going to work. So I'll introduce each one separately and then give them some time to discuss and present on 2 specific topics that they've sent ahead of time. And then we'll open it up for some questions for you to submit specifically about each one of the topics or anything else you'd like to ask about a young adult ministry. They, like many of you, have read the article Faith Formation with Young Adults by Kyle Matthew Oliver, which was offered as suggested reading for this webinar by NCCL's Adult Faith Formation Committee. So with that, we're going to proceed in alphabetical order. So we'll begin with Robert. Let me read your bio before I let you start here. Robert Feduccia is the founding director of the Youth Liturgical Leadership Program at St. Meinrad, where he also earned a master's degree in theology. He travels nationwide giving retreats, parish missions, and training presentations for lay ecclesial ministers. He served as the general manager of Spirit and Song at OCP for 9 years and is currently the vice president of Equipping the Saints, division of Declan Weir Productions. Robert, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. I think the big thing in the article that hit me was that about spiritual growth. And what I see right now is not that we are in a catechetical crisis, that we're in a spiritual crisis. And I'm going to give just a very brief history about catechesis, particularly with our high school kids, and then how we are kind of inheriting that in our young adults. So I'm sure Jared this is going to be history that he's very familiar with, but I'm going to do like just a very brief section of time, history of catechesis since the 60s. So we know in the 60s, early 70s, it was the Baltimore Catechism, and as it's often been described, it was the school of fast answers. You know, and if you've been through that, if you're educated in that, then you know the answers to who are you, who is God, why did God make you? You could roll that off right off your tongue. But that didn't necessarily mean living faith. So we began to ask the questions of why. But what happened is we went from the school of fast answers to the school of questions only. And that's the era that I had grown up in, which would be like the 70s and 80s, which there were never any really hard, solid answers. You know, so give you an example, I had to go to graduate school in theology, even to hear the phrase, the one true faith, that the Catholic Church was the faith founded by Jesus Christ, that the Pope is not just the Pope of Catholics, he's the Pope of all Christians. Those kinds of concepts, I thought, oh my gosh, that's kind of offensive, because I grew up in the Protestant South. My mother was a Southern Baptist, and so hearing these really hardcore Catholic concepts, that was foreign to me. So, I'm going to fast forward. I make my way through graduate school, and I'm teaching at a Catholic high school, and that's when one of the ACRE exams come out, which is an assessment on Catholic knowledge, on Catholic identity. And as I'm looking at the test, that my students were getting, I read through that, and I just went, they're not going to know any of this, because I didn't know any of that until going through grad school. Well, sure enough, the tests come back nationwide, and the bishops are just stunned at how illiterate our Catholic youth were. So now, to Ave Maria Press, St. Mary's Press, any other catechetical publishers, there was this invitation to submit all catechetical content to the Bishops' Committee on the Catechism. So there's to be found in conformity with the Catechism is a very high standard. It's not just an imprimatur. It's not just a nihil obstat. To have the conformity to the Catechism, it's very stringent. So we went from fast answers to all questions, then like a school of returning, and now it's the school of long answers. And I know Amy's going to talk about the nuns, but what, and just at the convocation that we had, the USCCB's Convocation for Catholic Leaders in July, one of the bishops said that with all of the effort towards conformity to the Catechism, it has not had the intended results, that we continue to lose people. So it's not a catechetical crisis where we are. Here's something that when I'm presenting, I talk about the prayer syllogism, and that is that when you take a look at what is common among those who remain in the church, the number one common behavior of those who remain in the church is daily personal prayer. Okay, so here's the syllogism. If daily personal prayer is what is common among all who remain active, 2, if the Catholic Church has the highest rate of attrition among Christian ecclesial communities and denominations, which is true, then what's our therefore going to be? That if prayer is the key, Catholic teens are the least likely to pray, then our therefore is we're going to have the highest rate of attrition. So where should we really be investing is in our spirituality, and as the disciples had said, Lord, teach us to pray. Because what I feel like we've done is we have this entirety of the Catholic tradition, and we've been giving the catechetical portion of it, which is important. And believe me, I shouldn't say pride myself. I humbly accept my orthodoxy. I want to be orthodox in what I believe and in line with the church and think with the church in the long tradition of the church. And the catechetical content is vital. But we've been teaching only that. Because what John Paul II said was that the new evangelization is not a mere passing down of doctrine, but it is about a profound and personal meeting with the Savior. So teaching our young people to pray and to pray with Scripture, to encounter the Lord in Scripture, that's what's vital. Okay? Which brings me now over into the second part of what I'd like to talk about, which is about the transitions. So moving on into college, what I have found, I wanted to do, because I saw all the numbers, all of the research that's been done, and I wanted to get in touch with young adults who were leaders back when they were in high school youth ministry, and to see, like, this would be a great test group to see how effective that we've been. And I found a lot of leaders who were still active, and that was very encouraging. Some were struggling. But what I saw is that when these then high school students move into college and they got bumped with something in life, and I'll give you 2 very fast anecdotes. One was from someone named Elizabeth, whose it came out that her uncle had been abused by a priest. And she did not have the ability to reconcile that. And then someone else named Charlotte. Charlotte, it came out that her dad was gay in her sophomore year. And she did not have the same community that she had in high school to kind of catch her, to buoy her. Both of them experienced that, felt this great isolation and this great loneliness. some other people I could name. Mark and Patrick would be two others who basically have like a syncretism kind of an idea that there are many paths to the divine, and who's to say one is better than the other. All four of those people, to me, are demonstrating something that is spiritual. So if we're equipping them at these for the transition, I should say. Last point is I think what we have are concentric, or I should say parallel Ferris wheels: high school youth ministry, and then campus ministry, and then over here we have young adult ministry. And there are these great gaps between those rides. And I think we ought to be looking at it more as conveyor belt. That those of us who are investing in youth ministry, we need to maintain that conveyor belt to maintain when our young people are getting bumped as they enter into high school, or excuse me, from high school into college life. And by bumped, I mean those real deep disruptions. Because I know as a youth minister, I did a good job, and I think I did do a good job, of equipping teens for the questions they were having today, but not for the questions that were going to be coming up. So being someone who is in their life to maintain a presence beyond the parish, and not just saying stay warm, well fed as you go on to college, but really maintaining a relationship with them through that. I think that's vital, so that we're not just parish ministers, that we're entering into long-term investment of relationships. I think that's going to be the key as we say goodbye to the high school years and they move into the college years.
Good, Robert, thank you. If you have any questions for Robert, anything you want to touch back on later on during the Q&A part, feel free to do that now. And I think all the other panelists, I'm guessing, Robert, are going to kind of build upon what you said and add to it, and then as we go along, and hopefully we'll have some more discussion. So thank you so much, and we'll come back to you soon.
Very good.
So next, I'd like to welcome Gabriela. Gabriela Karaszewski is currently the director of the Office of Young Adults and Campus Ministry at the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. She serves as a member of the National Advisory Team for Young Adult Ministry for the Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth at the USCCB. Previously, she was the director of faith formation for 10 years at a parish. She's originally from Mexico and married to a Polish man and has 2 daughters. So Gabriela, welcome.
Thank you, Jared. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Yes, for those who read the article of Kyle Oliver, I was very excited to see that he was going to talk about culture shift. My surprise is that he talked about culture shift, meaning that we needed to be more authentic, that we were different than baby boomers, and he talked about an emphasis on service and community. But what I didn't find anything was actually about the real culture shift going on in the United States, the demographic shift. So I wanted to touch upon that a little bit. For those who were not aware, obviously things are happening differently in the East and the Midwest of the United States, comparing it to the South and the West of the United States. But overall, right now, 40% of the Catholics are Hispanic or Latino. When we look at the statistics of what's going to happen in the next 20 years, it's actually quite scary, because 60% of all Catholics under the age of 18 are Hispanic or Latino. That doesn't mean that they just immigrated from South America. What it means is most of them actually were born in the United States. They are called second or third generation. They're Americans, they speak English, they know this culture. Just the difference that their first language is English, but their first prayer language might be Spanish. And I don't want to oversee, there is a whole 10%, in addition to that 60% of people coming from the Caribbean, from Asia, from Philippines, and so on. So there is a lot of a huge demographic shift going on in the United States right now in the last 50 years or more. Now, what do we have in young adult ministry right now is a very huge open window of opportunity. We only have 9% of the leaders are Hispanic. So here we have a 60% population, and then we have a 9% leaders are Hispanic that understand the culture and speak the language. So I am blessed to be bilingual, bicultural, but I understand most of my fellow young adult ministers are neither bilingual or bicultural, and yet they're wanting to serve this population that might be in the peripheries right now. So I've come up with some few suggestions for everyone to be able to serve better to this community. The first one is to find gente puente, and what that means is bridging people. Find your young adults right now who are both bicultural and bilingual. Form them as leaders, and they will serve you on serving that population we might not be serving right now. The second one, a huge one I've been pushing in my diocese slowly, is how can I make my Anglo young adult minister intercultural competent? They don't need to speak Spanish. They simply need to understand the culture and make all those young adults that they're serving feel welcome. That's the first step, welcoming them, which is also the first step in Evangelii Gaudium by Pope Francis, which is you need to listen to the person. And you welcome them by listening to them, to listening to their story, by going to eat some dinner with them, by having coffee with them. So simply listen to this second and third generation, because guess what? They're not sitting in the pews. That's why we don't see them. Anyway, so welcome them, then make them feel like they belong to your ministry. And third, have a shared ownership with them. It's not like, here, great, we have a bilingual bulletin for you or a bilingual event for young adults, and that's all. But actually make them be part of your leadership team. The culture where Hispanics are from is a very rich culture. And even if you're not speaking the language, because again, the second, third generation are speaking English, they appreciate those little cues that have to do with their family or culture of origin. Anyway, the USCCB does have a great booklet that's only 15 pages long, English and Spanish, it is titled Building Intercultural Competency for Any Minister. So I really advise you to just buy it, read it on your own, and you're really gonna get a head start on everything. But basically, listen to their stories, walk with them. That is one of the points that I saw in that article of Kyle Oliver missing. And then I would like to speak about the other one, which is not missing. He did speak about this, is community of communities. A lot of the priests in my diocese arrive to me and tell me, oh, I don't have young adult ministry. I'm sorry, what can we do? And I tell them, what do you mean by not having young adult ministry? Do you mean that you just don't have a young adult group? And by saying that, you say you don't have a young adult ministry? And so what I've been trying to convey in the last few months is to especially pastors and parish leaders is young adults are not only present and they're not only wanting to be served in a young adult group. Young adults are everywhere in our parish if we look at them. They're in the liturgical ministries, they're Eucharist ministers, or they're lectors. They want to be, or some of them are already in parish councils. Obviously, they're present in our confirmation programs, the older ones. We have them in the baptismal programs. We have them in the engagement preparation programs, in the pre-marriage preparation programs, in the adult faith formation programs. So they are everywhere. We just might not acknowledge it, and we might not do enough work on forming all the DREs, youth ministers, every person in our staff, or even if they're volunteers, with this lens of having this lens of young adult ministry on how to serve them better. But they are there, and I can attest to that. My parish doesn't have a young adult group truly formed with bylaws and everything. They don't have a calendar yet. But I keep telling them we have a young adult ministry because they're present in all of these ministries. So we're a community of communities. Robert, you were mentioning, I love this idea of not just 3 circles, but a conveyor belt. And how these communities are not just isolated within our parish, but how can they unite with each other? So how many times have we heard single young adults saying, well, I'm already too old, I'm 35, and I'm about to get married, so I'm stepping out of my young adult group. Now I am homeless. I don't have a community for me anymore. Well, guess what? There is a community for you, and there should be one in your parish for all those couples getting ready towards marriage. That's your next community. And once you get married, whether you have children or not, there is another community, the young family community ministry. all we need to do is really move on this conveyor belt and do the transitions better and be less isolated. So that's all I wanted to share today with all of you.
Good, thank you. I think that's a fascinating point you just made there about the fact that we kind of tend to look at young adult ministry or youth ministry, and that's the only thing we offer for each group. But I think it's a wonderful, wonderful point that we have many, many things that all ages can get involved in. So thank you. I'm sure we'll come back. We've got questions coming in already for you, Gabriela, and we'll come back to those later on. We're going to move through to Amy. Amy McEntee is a pastoral associate for youth and young adult formation at St. Helen Parish in Dayton, Ohio. Previously, Amy served as an assistant director in the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Amy earned her MA in Theological Studies from the University of Dayton and has ministry experience in the area of faith formation for children, youth, and adults. Amy has served as a consultant and a presenter most frequently in areas of the use of social media and ministry, creative approaches to catechesis, and ministry to young adults. She's an amateur photographer, reluctant runner, and expert IKEA furniture builder. Amy lives with her husband, Patrick, in Dayton, Ohio. So, Amy, thanks so much for being with us again. You were here for a panel on young adults a while ago, and I'm great to have you back.
Am I on there?
Now you're good.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Sounds working.
Yeah, I'm skipping a little bit. I don't. Connection might be a little.
Yeah. So, and it's one of my. I don't know. Is it better? Okay. So I wanted to talk about, and you know, in the article, and Robert talked about it, and Gabriela talked about how important it is to have relationships with young adults and how they are present in our parishes. And personal relationships are really important, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on my next topic. But how do we get to have these relationships? How do we communicate with young adults? So part of the reason that this topic came up is that I was on Facebook the other day, and a young adult that I have done retreats with had posted on her Facebook status, "What's the secret code word that I have to use to get the parish secretary to call me back?" Because she's trying to plan her wedding and she can't get a phone call back. So why is this important? Because among millennials especially, but the trends, the demographics we're seeing among Generation Z as well, phone calls are a tremendous source of anxiety. It's hard to make a phone call, and that sounds ridiculous to some people because we do it every day. We have these phones, but they really can be a source of anxiety. They prefer other forms of communication, but they will make phone calls if it's important. So if you're getting a phone call from a young adult, it's important, and they really want that return phone call in a timely manner. So there was a study done on 500 million millennials, and they said that their preferred way of communicating is by text message, and especially by two-way text message. So part of the reason for this is it's just as immediate as a phone call, but they have the ability to review and to revise the message that they're sending along. And so there are mechanisms that allow us to have this method of communication with millennials, but are we using those? Is that something we should look more into? The other thing that was really important in this study is that they talked about, especially in a professional context, that millennials will use email, but there's one really key detail, and that's the subject line. There are over, I want to get the statistic right, so I'm actually going to read it, over 205 billion emails are sent every day. And so in order to get a millennial especially, but let's be real honest, all of us have ignored something in our inbox at some point. In order to get millennials to open the email, there has to be enough context and relevance in the subject line that when they read it, they say, "Oh, I know what that's about." And that's the key to getting that email open. So I have four kind of practical, what are the considerations with communicating with millennials. So the first one is that they're visual. And we have this tremendous visual history of our church. We have these gorgeous pieces of artwork. Our churches tell stories. Are we embracing that in our attempts to communicate, both through social media, through our bulletins, on our websites? Are we taking advantage of the fact that we have this rich visual history that communicates so much of our message, of that transcendence, of that relationship with God? So the next thing is immediacy, that the world has made it that we are used to getting and communicating whenever and wherever we are. So one of the things that's really important here is, are our websites up to date, attractive, and easy to navigate? If a young adult is doing a Google search to find your website, number one, you've got half the battle because they're looking for you, and most young adults aren't. But are they able to find what they're looking for? And is there something in the way that you navigate your website that will help them get that attention and communicate immediately? Or do they have to wait until tomorrow when your business hours are there? So the third one is flexibility, that young adults are used to getting information and responding when it's convenient. And so that's part of this text messaging and email over phone phenomena, is that I'm not interrupting your day, but I also can send it when I remember to send it, this message. I don't have to call during office hours. And so are we offering our content, our formation, our communication in a variety of methods that give a number of options for how to communicate? So in the article, the author talked about that young adults don't always want an online component for faith formation, but are we giving them that option of having things that are in person, that are online, that are that they can respond to it online, even if it's not like a gathered webinar like this? So are we using a variety of methods that offer some flexibility? And the last one is concise. And this one's really tricky because, as Robert just said, we are the school of long answers. So is there a way to do a quick kind of chunking of what the message is so that its ability to be shared quickly, to be consumed quickly, but engaging enough that it brings us back wanting more, so that we're digging in deep to that long answer, but in smaller chunks? So face-to-face dialogue has its place, but in the rest of the business, if you will, of the church, are we able to give information and to give responses in a quick way, but one that leaves us wanting to come back for more answers? So not just a one and done, but that an ongoing formation that can go from that. And so one of the things that's really important is we talk about this need to do social media, and as I said in my bio, I teach this class, I do these workshops, and the reality is that if we can invest time in social media, and that's a great way to pull in some of those young adults, is to help you to develop this if you're willing to give them the control to do it in a way that they understand. It's a great opportunity, but clunky, or we haven't updated Facebook in 6 weeks, but it's Christmas, so maybe we should change the picture. The clunky social media doesn't help anyone, and mean social media doesn't help anyone. And so there's been some ongoing kind of church debates that happen on Twitter or on Facebook, and they're actually counterproductive to the message that we're trying to help. So then my second topic here is about the nuns and the duns. So the nuns are those whose affiliation on sociological surveys is none. And so statistically, I'm sure you've heard a lot of this, there are more unaffiliated Americans than there are practicing Catholics at this point. So 25% of Americans are unaffiliated, and they're overwhelmingly young adults. So 90% of those who left religious practice left before the age of 29. There's some interesting things that kind of play out when you go through the study. So if you're using the Pew study or those others, that approximately 68% of those who are not religiously affiliated do actually believe in God. 21% say they pray every day. So there's some really interesting practices that seem contradictory there. And I think one of the practical things to look at in that is to not clump them all together, that there's a variety of categories that get clumped together as none. So what are some of the things that we need to know? What are the opportunities here? Well, 68% of the unaffiliated believe that a community of people who share your values is very or somewhat important. So that community component that Gabriela was talking about, how do we bring young adults together? Even if religiosity is not the shared value, what are those other things that they share? It gives us an opportunity. And it's important to remember that 88% of them are not looking for a religious group. So this kind of idea of, well, they're away, but they'll come back, that's not actually true. That's not going to play out that way. And a really important component of this is illustrated. David Kinnaman, they talk about his categories in the article: the nomads who are wrestling with faith, the prodigals who are rejecting faith for something else, exiles who are removed from the church. And as he wrote that, one of the things that he said is that 84% of young non-Christians, so those who are not religiously affiliated, they don't consider themselves Christian, know a Christian personally, but only 15% see a lifestyle difference in that person. So the way that our lived witness is coming out is a huge part of religious affiliation, how they see Christians, how they see the church, and how that plays out. So a category within the nuns are the duns, and these are the people who were at one point part of the church, but they're disillusioned with church. So some significant factors about them is that they were very committed, and now they're disaffiliated, and they often were the most active clear up until the point that they left. They were frustrated. Those who said, I was part of the church and now I'm done with church, they were frustrated with a variety of things. So it can be with how the church structure, their inability to move into leadership positions, that some of the stances of particular teachings, or at least their understanding of those teachings. And most of them were frustrated for a long time. It's not a single event that said they just go, oh, well, I'm done. So it's not my friend who can't get the parish secretary to call her back. That's not our issue. But they often have been feeling frustrated with church and finding their space there for a long time. Generally, these are people who fall in the middle of the spectrum. They're not your liberals or your conservatives, either politically or religiously. They're somewhere in that middle space. And an important thing about those who are done with the church is that they're not done with God. They are part of those 68% who believe God. They pray. Some of them even continue to come to worship services. And it's estimated to be approximately 30 million adults who were highly engaged in their churches who are now just done with church. So what are some of our opportunities here, especially when I say they're not coming back? So one of them is service. 77% of disaffiliated believe that churches do good work in serving the poor. So connections to service and service opportunities are really a moment that we can be present to those who are away from the church. Being a good neighbor. So how is your church engaged in the larger community? How are they a visible face of things that are real? And real social problems in your community. So here in Dayton, we were recently made national headlines for leading the country in overdose deaths. And so how are churches participating in how we are addressing addiction and that reality here in Dayton? And another one is conversations. So is there room for doubt? They don't believe you have to be a religious person to be a moral person. So it's not necessarily a question of morals, but how are we engaging in how people are treated? How are we participating in conversations? And so these range from a whole gamut from how are we treating women? What's the role of women in the church? How are we participating in Black Lives Matter? How are we addressing immigration issues? And how are we supporting and standing with our brothers and sisters who are dreamers and as they face uncertainty? Healthcare, these are important issues to young people, and so when the church's voice is absent from this, that makes the church even more irrelevant to their lives. And so we have to find a place. The article says we need a place for their values to take root within the church. And that seems contrary because sometimes you want to say, this is what it's about to be church and you find how you fit with us. But it really is, how do we enter into that conversation with them? And so part of this is having authentic gatherings in small groups, in homes, in ways for people to see really lived expressions of faith, of prayer, and of what it means to be a good neighbor in a way that moves beyond just doctrine and catechesis, but in a formative and transformative way of life.
Thank you, Amy. All right, so last but not least, Nicky Uerling. She moved to Ohio from the Arctic cold of Wisconsin with her family in 2012. She studied theology at the University of Dayton and proceeded to work in the world of campus ministry for 8 years, helping students, faculty, and staff live their faith out in everyday life. Passionate about helping her 3 boys learn about their faith, the Generations of Faith program, an interfaith catechetical program, was a natural fit. In her free time, Nicky loves to read memoirs, play guitar, and go hiking with her family. Nicky, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition from college life and campus ministry back into parish life. So I spent, as Jared said, about 8 years working in full-time campus ministry and working with young adults at the collegiate level. And what I found that it was very interesting to me is that a lot of these young adults would call me, 6 or 7 months after they graduated and say, well, I tried this church and I tried that church and it's heart-wrenching, because these would be young adults who had really stepped up and who were phenomenal leaders within a campus ministry program, but they didn't have the skills to navigate transitioning back into parish life. And so I realized that there was a couple things that needed to happen on my end, on a campus ministry end, to help them transition back in. But there's also things that we can do on a parish end to help students transition back into, okay, now you're a young professional, or whatever role of life you're starting to take, but transitioning back into parish life. I think that's particularly true if the campus ministry they attended was at a Catholic university where you're in a department of campus ministry, or if you're at a standalone Newman Center where you're not part of the larger parish context. So you're a little bit more only with young adults in those 2 instances. And I would say that's not as true in university parish settings where you're still fully integrated into a parish setting. But anyway, so a couple things is that I really think campus ministries, we have to really gear up on, just like Robert talked about earlier, about helping our students know what questions come next. So again, I think as a campus minister, I was doing a really good job of talking to these students about the questions they were having now and about navigating some of the tensions between their academic life and their faith life. But I wasn't making sure they were asking the questions about what came next. So when I go back into a parish community and I feel really isolated, it may not be that the parish isn't welcoming. It may be that I'm feeling a sense of isolation, which is a standard part of a transition or a change or moving to a new place. And just preparing them for what does it really mean to move to a new place, to not know anyone, just some standard transition things. So at our campus ministry, we actually designed a retreat for seniors. It was a transitions retreat. And so only the seniors came away, and we spent some time talking. I think you can really use some of your young alumni to be a valuable resource in something like that, to come back and talk about what did that transition look like for them, how were they able to navigate moving from point A to point B. I also think campus ministers really have a duty to make a sense of connection between other diocesan offices, so that, so for instance, I had a young adult who moved up to Toledo, and I was able to call their diocesan office and say, okay, we have a young adult who's coming, can you recommend a young adult friendly parish for them to step into? And, I think these people are just invaluable resources. It's sometimes not the first person we think to call, but they know what parishes are really ready and engaged and ready for young adults to really step in and continue to grow. And they know what parishes might not even notice that there's someone new in their pew, right? Which I think is actually an indicator of a larger problem. I think, maybe there's a sense of needing to train parishes on how to be welcoming in that sense. I don't think that's a young adult only problem. On the other end, on the parish end, we also need to be doing things so that we are training our parishioners to look around and see, hey, who's new that you don't recognize? Say hello. Whether they're young or old, that's across the board. That's a kind of blanket thing. Amy was talking about communication as parishes, like how are we getting information out there? The bulletin is one way. There's a subset of people that read the bulletin, but do you have an active Facebook account? You should. Instagram definitely is starting to spike up, especially with the Gen Zs. We see a lot of Instagram. Flocknote utilizes text blasting. So Amy was talking about how text messaging, most young adults communicate through text message. We use Remind 101, or I think it's just Remind now, at our parish, just to communicate with these young adults. So as they're coming in, there is a point person for them to contact. contact. That information is available for them just across the gamut. And then also, I think just having young adults being part of your liturgy so that when they come in, they see other people that are taking roles in their choir as lectors, as Eucharistic ministers. It just helps to extend that sense of welcome. I don't feel like I'm saying anything earth-shattering here. Like, I feel like this is just pretty standard stuff as far as just the ability for people to connect, right? Because we connect best when we see something that might look somewhat familiar. And we do that by having various types of people in our ministries. So I think for right now, that's what I've got about transitions from college to parish life. And then I also want to talk just a little bit today about working with young families. So the position that I'm in now is a director for, gracious, I should have done my own title. I don't know, pastoral minister for catechesis. That's what it is. But basically, we run a Generations of Faith program, so it's intergenerational, which means that our young families come to our religious education courses together. And one thing that I've really found to be true, especially of Gen X parents, is that they want to be engaged with their children in their children's learning. And so, and I think there's research that's coming out that's kind of showing that as well. And so one of the things that we did this last month was offer learning stations in which parents and their children traveled together. And so they were able to learn the same thing. And I think part of the reason that's successful, one is the parents are right there, they hear what their children are hearing, so they can reinforce it at home. But also, I think just that idea of, in the history of catechesis, when you were at that point where it was just asking questions and sometimes you didn't always get an answer, that's a lot of who our parents are right now. And so I think sometimes if we can offer that to them, is the reality is they haven't necessarily heard the answers to some of their questions. And so we can provide them a place where they're learning it very naturally with their children. Nobody feels like, oh, I don't know the answer, because it's just there. I think the other thing that's crucial with families, and we talked a little bit about prayer today too, we have to teach our families how to pray together and offer them opportunities to do that. And make sure that the opportunities that we offer them to pray together are child-friendly. There's obviously a time and a space for that. But I think so many times I hear from young families, well, I didn't want to come to that because, you know, my 2-year-old won't sit. I have a 2-year-old. My 2-year-old won't sit either. I tried to take him to daily mass the other day, and it was atrocious. You know, but there's other young parents that when I talk to them, I hear them saying the same things, like, oh, well, I'm so embarrassed because my child is screeched during mass. But, you know, it's okay. They're there. And I think there's two things that happen. One is the more your child is there, the more they learn what behaviors are appropriate and how to be in church. But two is the community also learns, you know, every time we hear a baby cry, every time we hear a toddler shriek, it's a sign of growth in our church. So I think, again, there's that both and of, you know, we need to train our parishioners to be okay with that. But we also need to help our children know what that appropriate behavior is. And part of that is by encouraging parents, you know, keep bringing your toddlers to Mass, keep bringing your young children to Mass so that they do learn. I was just at our toddler play group this morning, which is something, sorry, that's something else I really recommend. I think every parish should have a toddler play group. It's a great way to connect. Well, you start connecting with the other young moms and young dads with young children. You get them familiar with your church building, feeling comfortable there. But it's not an environment where you're trying to, you know, your kids are playing, but the natural conversations that happen during that are just dynamite. Your kids, you know, they're playing, they're doing their thing, and suddenly you're talking about, you know, does your kid shriek during Mass too? Yeah, oh, that's okay. And you can at least start those conversations, and you can start talking about parishes that are welcoming and what those parishes have done. So I said I brought my 2-year-old to Mass the other day. He learned that if you shriek in there, the echo is just so delightful. And I finally took him out because I just didn't think that the end goal of praying was being met, and I didn't want to disrupt other people's prayer. And I will happily tell you that I had at least 5 people come up to me after Mass and said, oh, honey, you did not have to remove your child at all. It was just fine. And I can't tell you about the grace that gave me as a parent to say, it's okay, my kid's learning. And I think that sometimes as parishes, that's one of the best things that we can offer to young families is just that grace of saying, you know, it's okay, my kids did that too. they'll learn. It'll be okay. So, yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. We have a ton of questions that have already come in, and some of them are directed specifically toward each one of you. Some of them are more general, and we'll get to as many as we can. So we have, let's see how much time we've got left. So we got about 15 minutes of kind of Q&A, and I'll try to direct them to each one of you. And like we said before, the webinar, just feel free to indicate to me, panelists, if you'd like to jump in and say something. Let's see, so it's a really practical question from Beth. A couple of people have mentioned texting as important. I think Amy started that off, and so I'll send it to you first, Amy. Beth asked, office phones do not have texting capabilities, so do you want parish employees to use their own phones?
Great, that's a great question. So Nikki named that there's actually a variety of services that are available that allow you to use a computer to then send to text messaging. So I think that should parish staff use their own phones, it is, number one, that's a case-by-case question. There are some parents that, yeah, I use my own phone with, particularly when I'm dealing with high school youth ministry. I have a tendency that it's just fast and easy to use my own phone. But the bigger picture is that we have used Remind in our parish. We have used Flocknote. There's a variety of systems that are available at a number of price points. And so I think the first conversation needs to be, is this something that is realistic and needed in our parish? And then what is the best way to approach that? What services do we directly need? And then what can we budget for that? So right, it's not necessarily going to be your personal phone to text message, but there are other systems that are available.
So Thomas, a great question. I think we'll field it to everybody. He says, my priest approached me just today about putting together a survey for young adults and or a focus group. What are the key questions that I should be asking or that I would want to ask? Robert, we'll start with you and then we're going to go through it.
Yeah, that sounds, that's terrific. You know, obviously I was presenting on spirituality. That's what I would love to sit down with more young adults about that, because we've all heard it. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, and what that says to me is I don't shake my finger at them. I shake our finger at us, which says to me they haven't found spirituality in religion. So I would want to learn more about what do they understand about spirituality, where are they finding that, what's their spiritual quest, what do they want out of life in general from a spiritual standpoint. That would be very very key question for me. The other thing would be I would want to know where are you hanging out. If you're not at home, if you're not at work, where do you go? And fast anecdote. A friend of mine said, you're involved in camp in youth and young adult ministry. I said, yes, I am. He said, what are you guys doing for young adults? And what I said was, well, we don't know where they are, because they go from high school to college, and then after college they'll go to another town, and we just don't know that they're there. And he said, I don't buy that for a moment. And so I said, all right, tell me what's going on. And he told a story about his brother being in line at Starbucks, went to Catholic high school, off to college, different town. Exactly the scenario I just laid out. While he was in line at Starbucks, someone said, would you want to join us for a Bible study over here in the corner? And he never turned back to a Catholic church, only for weddings and funerals. He's been going to an evangelical church ever since. I would want to know, where are they hanging out? Instead of just opening up the doors and saying, y'all come, I would want to learn where they are so I could begin to do a true outreach to where they are.
Let's go into the margins right there, Robert. That's a great example. Thank you. Amy, what are some questions you want to ask? And then Gabriela.
Right. So I think that one of the really interesting things, specifically related to affiliation and disaffiliation, is that there are a significant number of young adults who are leaving the church over things the church doesn't teach. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, we just need to revamp all of our catechesis and do it in a different way. There are probably some ways where there's some messages that need to be true, but one of the things we need to recognize is that that there's a lot of messages that are coming together through a variety of sources. And so there's an interpretive lens that sometimes gets muddied between, did I see this on TV? Did I hear this in class? You know, I was paying attention to whether or not in middle school that girl liked me. Like, so there's a whole lot of stuff going on. And so not to be a catechetical bully, but to ask, what are those teachings of the church that you find really difficult? What are the big questions of your lives? And what do you think the issues are that we need to be addressing? Just as global citizens, what are the issues we need to be addressing? And kind of looking for that intersection of what do they understand, what are they questioning, and what's the stuff that occupies the space of their brains, what keeps them awake at night. So a combination of what are the church teachings that you find difficult or you don't understand, and then what are the questions that we should be asking, what are the issues that we should be addressing.
Thanks. Gabriela?
I just want to piggyback. I was going to say something different, but I want to piggyback on something just Amy mentioned, which is just the open question. We recently canceled our Theology on Tap series, and we call it now the Challenging Faith series. So we don't have a topic that we prepare and pre-program for the young adults to go to, but backwards. They come into an empty table, bring in all your questions. Well, we saw triple the amount of young adults just coming in and wanting to give us all their challenging questions. But I just, when you were talking, Amy, that's something that rang on my bell. But what should be asked on a survey? I myself have made this mistake many times. Is what do you need from the church? Do you want a spirituality? Do you want service projects? Do you want to have fun? Do you want relationships? I give them all the options for them to check. But in this article that we're reading for this webinar, the author actually made a great point, is we shouldn't be asking what do you need from us, but what can we build together? So that's something the young adults are always ready and willing to do, is to give almost before receiving. So what can you give? Should be one of the questions too. What are you interested in giving? Or offering your skills on any area, not just ministry. And one huge example is just recently in Hurricane Harvey, my ministry was so easy because young adults did it all. I just had to be the facilitator. Okay, we have 10 young adults from this group and 5 other young adults from this group, and they all want to go to this neighborhood to do something. They did it all. They were ready to serve. They were not waiting for us to propose, oh, would you like to go here? Would you like to donate that? They just did the whole thing themselves. So to me, it was a huge witness of how we really want to give them the space to build things together and not just put on a box, do you want this or that? Anyway, that's something that came to my mind when you asked about survey.
Thanks. About Nicky, any questions you want to ask?
Yeah, really, I guess just like to echo what Gabriela just said, that and say that sometimes I think we spend so much time thinking about what could we be doing and how would I put that on a box. And sometimes, you know, one of the best things to do, especially if you have a focus group, to open that up for dialogue and just let them talk to you and hear what they're saying, which I think, you know, to hear that with true listening, what are these young adults saying? What's the true desire and craving, and where are their interests, and where do their skills already lie? Because sometimes, you know, the church may already have an organization that they can plug into, and if we can facilitate a relationship between someone that we already know in that group, that we know is a person that will be receptive to bringing a young adult in, you know, that we can create almost mentoring relationships that allow these young adults to continue to grow into leadership in our parish, you know, and yeah, that I think a lot of times those conversations can happen simply by listening to what young adults are already saying and what they're telling us they're already good at.
Nicky, I'm going to throw a question right back at you, and then if the others could jump in as well with their thoughts. We have a couple questions about young adults who are young families. Marcy asked, any thoughts on how to better teach our parishioners to be more welcoming to young adults and young families with children? Any specific suggestions? Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing that our pastor does is, and he has, like, people know the homily now. It's called the Cry Baby Cry homily. It's posted on our website, but I'm saying, like, people know. But it comes from the pulpit. And I think that's huge because our pastor regularly reminds people, it's okay. I like to hear babies cry, and this is why. And when you're saying that from the pulpit, then everybody is hearing it. And, you know, there are people that Father says, therefore, it is. And I think sometimes we have to utilize that. So, you know, that I will say is something that our parish pastor is extremely good at, and I think does help our community culture a lot. The other thing is that I think, like, so for instance, I go to our altar guild. I think I'm the youngest member by, I think everyone there's like twice my age, okay? But how our altar guild formed is that it was a bunch of young moms that got together. And if we can appeal to that side of those women, what I have found is that now those older women will come up to me during Mass and say, oh, can I take your 2-0? Can he sit by me today? And I think the reason that happens is by virtue of relationship. So I think sometimes it's a conversation with some of those, you know, the grandmas who have grandkids that don't live in state. They're prime. Tap them, you know. And some of that too. I mean, relationships have to build because I wouldn't want a stranger coming up and saying, can I take your child? That probably wouldn't be good. But if we're building those relationships, I think that's a key place for those to happen. And I've seen that happen at other parishes as well, where one of my child was fussing, and one of the other moms just came up and said, why don't you let me try for a minute? And I'm telling you, it's just, I think there's a great relief in that, and I think it's a way that then I automatically knew it was a safe community for me to bring my children, and that people really cared about my children and about my sanity as a mother. So.
Anybody else want to jump in from their experiences in their parishes and their ministries?
I could do so from what we're trying to do right now, and I'm not necessarily, you know, telling people to do alpha, but when I was looking at, I was writing the evangelization paper for the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, and what I saw was common among very effective parishes. It was the effective use of small groups. So right now, what we're moving towards in our own parish would be the sacramental moments, confirmation, first communion, and baptism. And then when the parents are preparing to try to get them into small groups, so when there are small children, you know, like Nicky was talking about with babies, to try to get the time that is not just mother's morning out or parents' time away, but to find some babysitters for them, and then to have some facilitated discussions where they're building community with one another and able to talk specifically about faith. So it's not just that there's an intentionality to the community. That's not just a community of friendships, but there's a community of discipleships and faith questions.
So maybe you have time for one more question, which I think is repeated. At least the sentiment is repeated in some others. Teresa's asking. Let me find out. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, Jennifer. How can we welcome more young adults into those communities in which they are often found but don't feel welcome? I love the example, Robert, you gave about going to Starbucks. Any other examples of getting out of the church and going to where they are, whether it's with social media or whether it's physical places like a Starbucks or other events? Anyone want to offer some of those other additional suggestions going out of the doors and not just welcoming but inviting? Go ahead, Gabriela.
I say it is a hard work. It's hard to outreach. It is the answer to a lot of our questions, to go out of the parish boundaries, out of the parish doors, and to outreach is difficult. And success stories that I've heard is really the one-to-one accompaniment. It is not the group setting in which, okay, everyone's in Starbucks. Well, it worked for Robert, but everyone's in Starbucks, let's everyone go there. It's more like a one-to-one, and that's where it all starts. And then maybe that one-to-one will grow to 2 or 3 or 4 people on reaching out where they're at. I have heard the very successful stories. We had the young Catholic professionals in town, and they meet for happy hours in several different places, and they're numerous. So you're talking about 50 to 100 young adults just checking into a huge restaurant or a huge venue, and everyone who's not Catholic does start asking, hey, what is this group about? Oh, man, I'm Catholic too. So they just really start outreaching, but that's by the numbers. They impress everyone else. So outreach is hard, but I still believe that is the answer, and it is more of a commitment of one-to-one than a whole group for it to work, according to me.
Thank you. Amy, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that part of it is having opportunities to talk about how your faith plays out in your life. And having that skill means that it goes wherever you go. So I will tell you that some of my biggest faith conversations have been happening while I was running during a 5K because somebody asked me what I do. And then the other one would be before my husband and I owned a washer and dryer at the laundromat. You know, so kind of just those places that, you know, you have a book or you have this conversation, and so what does that look like for you? And being able to speak about that experience. So where Gabriela is saying it's one-on-one, yes, and sometimes that's overwhelming because you say, well, there's one of me and there's thousands of them, and how am I going to do this? But part of it is working with people. So if it's through like Alpha, as Robert said, or how you develop those small groups with the other moms, but that we get into this fluidity of talking about how has our life been transformed, or how are we living in a way that shows that our faith makes a difference. Why are we choosing to go to Mass at whatever time of day we choose to go to Mass rather than something else? Why are we putting that as a priority? But I think part of it is being able to feel comfortable with naming that ourselves, and then also how do we form others to have that skill as well, that it's just a very natural part of conversation and not some coordinated, today is my day, I'm going to go to Starbucks, I'm going to see if I can talk to, you know, this many people, but that fluidity of being able to speak about the role of God in your life, where you are in that is really important.
Nicky, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of want to echo that I feel like the moments where I really have those conversations are often not the planned moments, but simply, you know, I'm sorry, I don't remember who brought up the statistic, but that only 15% of people noticed a marked change. I think that was you, Amy, in the lives of their friends that were Christians. 15%. That kind of astounds me. I don't like that number. I really would like that number to go a lot up, and I think part of the way to help create these moments of encounter, right? Pope Francis talks a lot about moments of encounter, is to really let our faith radically transform our lives and to be that wherever we are. Because the reality is we all encounter young adults everywhere. And if we really truly let our faith transform us, hopefully people see that wherever we are. And maybe it does spark a conversation in the line at Starbucks, or you know, sitting on the sidelines of a soccer field, or any of those moments. But I think really it's got to be with us all the time. And I really think, like I said, the moments that I've really had those conversations, or where those things have really come up, almost have never been planned. But I think they often lead to a journey of, as Gabriela was talking about, accompaniment. And yeah, I agree, much more a one-on-one, where you can really talk about what does it really mean to be a disciple, how do we let faith transform our lives, so or small groups at best. So
Good. Robert, anything you want to add before we wrap up? The outreach?
I think that's part of it, is that so many times as ministers we can have the idea that that ministry is our job rather than discipleship is our being. There's an occupational hazard of compartmentalizing our lives, and it is living seamlessly. And as you know, 2 Peter 3:16 says, always be ready to give an account for your hope. And I think that's what's being said by the other panelists, is we carry the light of Christ with us everywhere we go, and we're looking for opportunities to share what the Lord has done for us. And when they come up, we do that seamlessly and not in a non-threatening way, but we just do that.
Good, thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the panelists for offering your expertise. I always wish these conversations could go on for a lot longer. We've got a number of questions that have coming in, so thank you for all those of you who asked questions but weren't able to get to those today. Super grateful. I just wanted to quickly before we wrap up, thank once again our partners in the series, the NCCL, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with them, check out their websites here. Also like to note the webinar is being recorded, and a link to this recording will be sent to you later this week. You can find all of the recordings from past webinars. I think there's been 104 at this point, I think, counted the other day. So avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. And there's also some young adult webinars there as well that you can find for additional insights. This was a part of a series, kind of a special series within the series of webinars that are brought to you in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership Adult Faith Formation Committee. So this is the second in a series called the Seasons of Faith Formation. It's the principles and practices of adult faith formation based on life tasks, needs, spiritual faith journeys of the 4 seasons and generations of adulthood. So we've done the young adults, 20s and 30s today. Midlife adults will be next, then mature adults, and then older adults will also be included in this series. These webinars are companions to the Season of Adult Faith series of articles published in the Catechetical Leader in the NCCL website and blog. I'd like to invite you to the next webinar in the series. It won't be until next month in October, tentatively titled Women's Ministry, Small Groups, and Faith-Filled Friendships. Michelle Family and Emily Jaminet will talk about how you can form women's ministries in your parish. We talked about it a little bit today and the importance of having opportunities for young women, young families, but there are women out there that want to have faith-filled friendships, and they're going to offer some insights on how to do that based on their experience organizing in Columbus, Ohio, and also other women's ministries in their own specific parishes. So looking forward to having them. And once again, I want to thank the 4 of you for joining us and dedicating your time in preparation, but also in presenting today. Super grateful for the insights you offered. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, Jared.
God bless everybody. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too.
You too.